Good day everyone, welcome once again to Horizon National Academy, and today we'll be discussing Bacterial Biology O2 Topic 2. If you have been following our previous lectures, we've discussed some varieties of stuff on the course outline on Topic 2, and we're going to be continuing from bacteria and discussing fungi, protozoan, viruses, algae, and archaea. So we're going to be discussing the size, the shape, and every other thing the course outline regards wants us to know about bacteria. So we're going to be starting by defining what a bacteria is. We all know bacteria are prokaryotic organisms, right? And all prokaryotes are unicellular organisms. So now if they ask you in your exam, define what a bacteria is. A bacteria is a unicellular prokaryotic organism. A bacteria is a unicellular prokaryotic organism. That ranges in size from 0.5 micrometer to 5.0 micrometer, and that's why we call bacteria microorganism, because 0.5 micrometer is as saying 0.5 times 10 to the power minus 6. That's how small a bacteria is, and that's why they are classified as microorganism. We can only see them with the aid of a microscope. So now that's the size of a bacteria. And now bacteria have various shapes. We have the cocci bacteria, we have the bacilli bacteria, we have the vibrio bacteria, and we have unusual type of bacteria. So now we're going to be discussing about the shape of bacteria, which the syllabus requires us to talk about. So when you're talking about the shape of bacteria, bacteria are various. They have various shapes. We have the cocci bacteria, which are the spherical like bacteria. The first one we're talking about is the cocci bacteria. We can ask you and mention or list the example of a cocci bacteria. We're going to be doing that here. So when they ask you for a cocci bacteria are spherical. These are spherical like bacteria. And now the cocci bacteria are divided into 6 further ones. These are spherical like bacteria. Now the cocci bacteria, we have the monococcus, we have the diplococcus, we have the tetrad, we have the sesine, we have the streptococcus, and we also have the staphylococcus. So now if they ask you, give an example of a cocci bacteria. These are different shapes that exist under the spherical like bacteria, and the monococcus is the single spherical like bacteria. Monococcus, these are the single spherical like bacteria. They are the single spherical like bacteria. So they can ask you your question. Single spherical like bacteria are called or are known as, the answer is monococcus. Diplococcus are double spherical like bacteria. There's double spherical like bacteria. Your tetrad are the 4 spherical like bacteria. There are 4 spherical like bacteria. Something like this. They are the 4 spherical like bacteria. You can see them in this presentation. So now what are your sesine? They are the 8 spherical like bacteria. These are something you can see in your OBJ question. These are the 8 spherical like bacteria. 8 spherical like bacteria. So now there are 2 major confusions between this and this, because it have come out before in your OBJ. You can ask you the long continuous chain spherical like bacteria is known as. A lot of times people mistake it for staphylococcus, but it's actually streptococcus. Streptococcus is the long chain spherical like bacteria. So this is the long continuous chain spherical like bacteria. This one, they are in long chain, something like this. You can see them in long continuous chain like this. So now what are your staphylococcus? Staphylococcus are the cluster-like spherical bacteria. They always appear in cluster. We have the cluster-like spherical bacteria. For example, now you can say your Staphylococcus aureus is a cluster-like spherical bacteria. When I mean cluster, they are cluster-like spherical bacteria. So now these are the major shape of examples of cocci shaped bacteria. These are not the examples, these are other shapes under the cocci bacteria. Now when you are talking about examples of the cocci bacteria, maybe in your theory or something, they ask you list 3 examples of the cocci bacteria. That's what we're talking about: the Pseudomonas aeruginosa, the Staphylococcus aureus, and the Streptococcus pneumoniae. So if they ask you give 3 examples of the cocci bacteria, that's what we're talking about. They ask you for the examples of the cocci bacteria. Examples of the cocci bacteria. Examples of a cocci bacteria. That's why we have the like of, we have the Pseudomonas aeruginosa. We have the Streptococcus pneumoniae, Streptococcus pneumoniae, and we have the Staphylococcus aureus, which is the same skin bacteria, Staphylococcus aureus. So they can ask in your exam, give 3 examples of a cocci bacteria. Don't be surprised. That's why we're talking about your Pseudomonas, your Streptococcus, and your Staphylococcus aureus kind of example. So if they ask you what is a cocci bacteria, we now know that a cocci bacteria is a spherical-like bacteria. What is a Caecina? A Caecina is an 8 spherical-like bacteria. What is Staphylococcus? Clustered spherical-like bacteria. So this shouldn't be new to you whenever they ask in your exam. Okay, we just concluded the shape of the cocci shape of bacteria. The second shape of bacteria shape we'll be talking about in this video is the bacilli, or you can call it the bacillus bacteria. Now bacillus bacteria, these are rod-like bacteria. Okay, these are rod-like bacteria, and there are various examples of this bacilli bacteria. When I mean rod-like, they appear like this. Those are the rod-like bacteria. And now if I want to talk about the examples of bacilli bacteria, the examples of bacillus bacteria, so their examples are you have the Salmonella typhi, you have the Salmonella entericus, you have the anthracis or Bacillus anthracis, which was previously known as Anthrax bacillus. So we have the Bacillus anthracis. We have the Clostridium tentenni, which causes tetanus. We have the Clostridium tentenni. We have the Clostridium botulinum, which causes botulinism. The Clostridium botulinum. Even your Escherichia coli, your E. coli is also a bacilli bacteria. Your E. coli is a bacilli bacteria. So in case in your exam we ask you a rod-like bacteria is called, it's bacillus, and they tell you give me 5 or 6 examples of a bacilli bacteria, you're talking about the Salmonella typhi, the Clostridium species, your Anthrax bacillus, which is now known as Bacillus anthracis. Even your Escherichia coli is also a bacilli bacteria. So this is another bacteria shape that we've talked about. And the next one we're talking about now is your vibrio, which are the comma-like rod-shaped bacteria, the comma rod-like shaped bacteria. So the third bacteria shape we'll be talking about for today is the vibrio shape, the vibrio bacteria. So if they ask you vibrio bacteria, we have that. This and that shape of the bacteria, and if they ask you what are vibrio bacteria, these are comma rod-like. They are comma rod-like shape. So this is how they look like. These are comma rod-like shape. So they ask you one common example of a vibrio bacteria is the vibrio cholerae, which is the bacteria that causes cholera. So one major example is the vibrio cholerae. So they ask you, vibrio cholerae is an example of what kind of bacteria shape. You now know that your vibrio cholerae is an example of a vibrio bacteria, which is the common root-like bacteria. Then the other bacteria she's talking about here is your spirochete, and your spirillum, spirochete and your spirillum bacteria. So your spirochete and your spirillum bacteria, your spirochete is the flexible bacteria. This is the flexible shaped bacteria. And your spirillum is your rigid shaped bacteria. And there are various examples of these bacteria. We have the most common example used is the Treponema pallidum. Major example used always is the Treponema pallidum. Treponema pallidum. Which causes syphilis. Treponema pallidum. Treponema pallidum is a bacteria that causes syphilis. And now the next shape we'll be talking about is your Mycoplasma, which are the unusual filamentous bacteria. Your Mycoplasma. These are the unusual type of filamentous bacteria. These are unusual type of filamentous bacteria. These are the unusual type of filamentous bacteria. So if they ask you, give one example of a Mycoplasma, that's where you're talking about your aquafish and your chlamydiae. Aquafish, examples of a Mycoplasma. These are your aquafish, which is also a phylum of bacteria, aquafish, and your chlamydiae. So these are the basic shape of bacteria. If they ask you, give 5 shapes of a bacteria, you know that's why you're talking about your cocci bacteria, your bacillobacteria, your vibrio, your spirillum or spirochete bacteria, and your Mycoplasma with their example. If they ask you, aquafish is an example of what bacteria shape, that you know they're talking about your Mycoplasma. Vibrio cholerae is an example of what bacteria shape, they're talking about your vibrio, and Vibrio cholerae is a bacteria that causes cholera. So that's it for this part. We've talked about the size and we've talked about the shape of bacteria. So now in our next video we'll be talking about the motility of bacteria, which we know that bacteria move with the aid of flagella, and that's what we're talking about in our next video. So we just concluded talking about the shapes and the size and also the unusual type of bacteria, and now we're talking about bacterial motility. Let's talk about the motility of bacteria. And we know that bacteria move with the aid of flagella. So bacteria move with the aid of a flagella. Bacteria, they move with the aid of a flagella. With the aid of a flagella. They can ask you, what is a flagella? A flagella is a whip-like structure. A flagella is a long whip-like structure. That enables bacterial movements by creating currents in the motility medium. So the flagella is made up of 3 major parts. The bacterial flagella is made up of 3 major parts. It's made up of the filaments, it's made up of the hook, and it's made up of the base. So the hook is what is the intermediate between the filaments and the base. So now flagella are divided into various parts. Okay, we have the atrichous, some bacteria that are atrichous, we have the monotrichous, we have amphitrichous, we have lophotrichous, and we also have peritrichous. So if they ask you, there are various types of flagella. There are various types of bacterial flagella. Now, what are the types? We have the atrichous bacteria. We have bacteria that their flagellas are atrichous. What are atrichous? They lack, these bacteria, they lack flagellas. They don't have any flagella. Now we have the monotrichous. They have one flagella at one end. Monotrichous. They have one flagella. They have one flagella at one end. And this is how they appear. Monotrichous bacteria appear like this. They have one flagella at one end. Now we have the peritrichous. Or we have the let's talk about the amphitrichous. The amphitrichous. Amphitrichous. CRI. The amphitrichous. So these are bacteria. They have two polar flagella at both ends. They have two polar flagella at both ends. That's one flagella at one end and the other one at the other end. This is how an amphitrichous bacteria look like. So now the other one, we have the lophotrichous. We have lophotrichous. They have multiple polar flagella at one end. They have multiple polar flagella at one end. And this is how lophotrichous bacteria looks like. They have multiple polar flagella at one end, just one end. Now we have what we call the peritrichous. These peritrichous bacteria, they have flagella all over their body. They have flagella all over their body. All over. So this is how a peritrichous bacteria looks like. They have flagella all over their body. They have flagella all over their body. So peritrichous, they have flagella all over their body. So now these are the different types of flagella that bacteria have, and now we've talked about their motility, and now we're talking about the general method of bacterial classification, which we can classify bacteria based on their shape, which we have done earlier. We can classify them based on their oxygen requirements, based on their nutrition, and various methods of their classification. So that's what we'll be diving into right now. We're talking about the general method of bacterial classification.